I'm with Sherbir Panag, who is a financial crimes and corporate governance lawyer. But the reason I have him here today at ThePrint is because I'm going to talk to him about Punjab. Now, there is a crisis in Punjab. Amritpal Singh, the man who is in the limelight, he's been hiding. He hasn't been arrested, whether he's in Delhi, Haryana, whether he's escaped from India. The question is, what's going on in that state, a border state as well, very sensitive. But to explain all this and more, welcome, Mr. Panag, welcome to ThePrint.
Thank you so much.
So my first question to you is about Amritpal Singh. Where is he and why is he running?
I think Amritpal's antics, antecedents, and also his false sense of bravado is sort of on display in terms of how he's capitulated from "I'm not scared of the agencies" to "I will not come forward and face a legal process." So I think that sort of tells us a lot about him, the larger than life image he wanted to create versus where he actually stood as a person ideologically and also in terms of his following. But I think, Jyoti, if we take a couple of steps back.
No, but tell me, why is he running?
Because he doesn't want he doesn't have the courage to face up to the law, and he should, but he doesn't, and I think that's about it. There's no better explanation.
So he has broken the law.
He has, absolutely. I think it's on camera in terms of what he led his supporters to do at the Ajnala police station,
right.
Even at the peak of militancy in Punjab
In the 1980s.
In the 1980s, a police station was never overrun like this.
Mm-hmm. So how did it happen? How was a police station overrun? What happened? Did the police just sort of melt away? Did this capitulate to this larger than life figure? I mean, what happened?
I think Amritpal's rise and the digital creation that he became raises all the suspicions there are about the fact that he was propped up.
By whom?
I would say a sort of mix of two or three elements. I would definitely say that he's likely to have been compromised while he was in Dubai by the ISI. That compromise sort of made sense because suddenly there was the farmers' protest at that point of time. There was a narrative being created that this isn't a legitimate process, but actually this is actually an anti-national Khalistani process, which left a lot of bruised and hurt ego. So there was a certain degree of hurt. And there was an opportune moment for somebody who wanted to act against India's interest to try and find a figure to rally behind. So I think that's where it happened. He came back. His sort of rise to become the sort
After 10 years in Dubai.
And his rise as the head of Waris Punjab Day is also very controversial. There are reports that suggest that Deep Sidhu himself blocked him on social media.
Sidhu, the man who died in an accident last year, but we remember that during the farmers' protest on 26 January a couple of years ago, when he led this very violent mob and they actually planted a flag on top of the Red Fort.
Absolutely, and highly condemnable act, which needs to be condemned with no ifs and buts.
Absolutely.
And so he gets leadership of Waris Punjab Day. It appears that Deep Sidhu's family was extremely upset by that, though that's one leaving that part aside. And I believe there was short-term political gain at play, whereby he wasn't the state did not act against him soon enough and allowed him to fester.
Allowed him to grow.
And I think a professional assessment that he didn't have a following and he wasn't large enough remains correct. And that remains accurate then, it remains accurate now. But to allow him to fester, to allow him to sort of to grow is and not have precautions in place. I think now every day there's a report coming out about whether it's weapons or training or a new front that they were trying to set up, etc. This should not come to anybody as a surprise. The writing was on the wall. But what I think ended up happening is that at some point of time, Amritpal decided that he felt that he had whatever support he was having. He was running these Amrit Sanchar, Amrit Prachar campaigns and felt that he needed to catapult himself to a sort of bigger stage. And he sort of saw this incident where a close aide of his was arrested as one of those. By first his threats to the police that if you don't release my man in X number of hours, you will be responsible for whatever happens after that.
Absolutely.
B, to bring a crowd. And I think his cowardice was on display by bringing the Sri Guru Granth Sahib to his protest stroke subsequent arson activities, knowing fully well that the police will not be able to act, or if they do act, it will provide him with a golden opportunity to sort of, become a larger than life figure in the backdrop of all the instances of Bedbi that Punjab is dealing with, which is a very rife political issue and a big and a religious issue, and as well as a sentimental issue at play. In fact, if you look at all our events regarding the SIT that's been formed, the fact that both the Badals, Mr. Prakash Singh Badal and Mr. Sukhbir Badal have been named, so on and so forth. So there is this element, and I think he very calculatively wanted something like this to happen. Potentially, and the thing is that, history has a habit of repeating itself. Even Bhindranwale had a moment like this when the clash with the Nirankaris took place. And I'm not trying to draw parallels between the two. So
that's my question. Are you trying to draw parallels between Amritpal and Bhindranwale?
No, I'm not. And I don't believe, I don't believe that he's tried to style himself as such. He had the potential of becoming a dangerous man and a terrorist. I don't think he quite got there. But did he want to style himself as Bhindranwale? Absolutely. Did he manage to get the cult figure and the cult status that Bhindranwale had? I don't think he got there.
So he's not the next Bhindranwale?
No, he's not. He's a small-time charlatan with little to no knowledge of scripture, and more like a small-time thug who's demonstrated cowardice on a couple of occasions. A, at Ajnala, B, on the Bedbi part, if prior to Ajnala, his supporters were going and breaking benches and chairs in gurdwaras for the elderly who could not sit on the floor, that everybody should sit on the floor in a gurdwara. So this is where this man was coming from.
No, but one second. I'd like to interrupt you here. You said he doesn't have the stature of Bhindranwale. Having said that, the people of Punjab are pretty much mesmerized by this man. He has a presence. He definitely has charisma. So why do they call him Pai?
Jyoti, I don't think I don't think the generalization would work. He's got a small following. Majority, and in fact, I went to Ajnala the day after this incident took place. I was going to the Golden Temple. And most people, even at that point of time, found his actions highly condemnable. In Ajnala and Amritsar, the fact that he brought the Sri Guru Granth Sahib, and in this cowardly manner, what his supporters did in terms of breaking chairs and benches in Gurdwara. So it's not that he has blanket support. And the idea of Khalistan has never really taken off in Punjab, even at the peak of militancy. If the accounts of whether or not Bhindranwale actually asked for Khalistan or did not ask for Khalistan, it's all highly controversial in terms of factual accuracy at that point of time. I'm not saying that Bhindranwale was a terrorist. Let's be clear about it in simple terms. But a political ask for Khalistan at that point of time is highly controversial, of whether he could or could not ask for it, or made a demand for it. But
do the people of Punjab think Bhindranwale was a terrorist?
I think there are lots that do, and there are lots that don't agree with him and the times it placed Punjab in, but wouldn't go as far as calling him a terrorist.
So it was divided at the time.
At the time, he was a cult figure. At the time he was around, he was a cult figure. He was somebody who had he had risen in the time of a political vacuum. He assumed a leadership role. He was propped and backed by Pakistan. He had several intellectuals at that point of time. He had the support of several intellectuals at that point of time. He was in a very different space as compared to Amritpal.
It is a different context, and perhaps that's not a fair question, because I remember those years quite well. And there was Operation Blue Star in June of 1984, followed by Mrs. Gandhi's assassination. And we saw in the wake of Blue Star how so many people. I mean, the Sikhs sort of mutinied
Yes.
in the Indian Army. And there was a lot of discomfort, not just in the Sikh community, but across the country about what had happened with Operation Blue Star. And then, of course, you have Mrs. Gandhi's assassination. Now, today, 30 years later, would you say, Mr. Panag, that Amritpal Singh is a Bhindranwale type of cult figure for Punjab?
I'll answer that in two parts. One, in terms of Punjab put an end to its bloody past and moved on.
Yeah.
And the majority of Punjabis moved on. And like I said, there was never a groundswell for Khalistan. It never culminated in a mass mass adoption, and even following the 1984 anti-Sikh riots,
Yeah.
and they never reached a stage where the balance could get tipped. And yes, there were instances of mutineers, and they were all prosecuted, and units were disbanded, so on and so forth. But
Absolutely.
the vast majority didn't, and that's a telling sign.
Yeah.
That the vast majority didn't, whether in the armed forces or the centrally armed police forces, so on and so forth. And the Punjab police ultimately bore the brunt of the operation. So that gives you a sense of how much resonance that there was. And over the today, somebody who was born in 1984 is nearing 40 years old.
That's right.
We are now nearing 2 generations that have not lived through that period. And things went wrong. Operations went awry. There were extrajudicial excesses, but for most part, truth and reconciliation requirements apart, Punjab moved on.
Also, so many Sikhs were killed.
Absolutely, there was the Sikhs bore the largest brunt of the extremist violence that Punjab saw at that point.
That was unleashed by Bhindranwale.
Absolutely, by him, his supporters, and what became of them subsequently. But as far as Amritpal is concerned, Amritpal has the potential to go down that path. He's not quite there right now. And that's what makes the police action at Ajnala all the more questionable and something that needs to be, again, condemned.
Why questionable?
Because, yes, when they came to I would say that the police acted with a fair degree of restraint when Amritpal and his supporters came with the Shri Guru Granth Sahib to the Ajnala police station to avoid an incident from happening. But if you look at some of the videos that have been leaked of how he was negotiating with them, and the capitulation at the end of the day of saying, yes, he came and gave evidence and he's gone away and everything is fine, and then our criminal justice system has many problems.
But what do you make of that then?
But it was ill-timed, poor judgment by the Punjab police to let that happen. He should have been arrested then and there.
Was it just poor judgment? Do you think that they were afraid of him for some reason? That he could perhaps capture a larger crowd? Or do you think that it could be more than that, perhaps political?
Well, I would like to believe that this was a poor on-the-ground decision that ended up happening. Not thought through at the highest levels of the state government at that point of time, that something like this could happen. And as a result, contingency measures were not in place to deal with it. But otherwise, we can't, Amritpal has shown that his sort of, he's effectively using scripture as a costume and has acted in a cowardly manner. He should have been arrested. The state cannot be held ransom to somebody who decides to dress up and come and storm a police station. And that should have happened then. The fact that the police action has happened now is fine. And I welcome the police action. And I think the editor of the Tribune actually made a remarkable comment saying that there is a sense of relief amongst the residents of Punjab that action is being taken against Amritpal. So der se aaye durust aaye, but at the same point of time, this should have happened much earlier. Why did we let it fester?
So why did the state capitulate? Do you think it was more than just Amritpal Singh trying to make, sort of get a cult following? Do you think that it was political, so the Aam Aadmi Party, do you think that they were just simply afraid? I mean, that's the generous explanation.
Jyoti, I would say that should the Aam Aadmi Party have been afraid, should the government have been afraid? Absolutely not. He didn't have the following to lead to that sort of fear. Should they have acted decisively and had contingency measures in place to take swift action sooner as opposed to several weeks later? Absolutely, because after the Ajnala incident is where he has been interviewed left, right and center.
That's right.
His entire online presence, till earlier it was a sort of, shadowy online presence that was there, that, that every second odd religious preacher in a small time religious preacher would have. But suddenly after Ajnala, he was being interviewed by everybody.
That's
from the BBC to leading Indian media channels. And why did we wait so long? Why did we have to wait till mid-March, 18th of March, if I'm not wrong?
So that begs the question, Mr. Panag, that not just was the Aam Aadmi Party, that perhaps they let it fester, like you said earlier, and that perhaps it was, and this is an accusation made by Pratap Singh Bajwa, who is a senior Congress leader in Punjab, and he believes that it was a joint venture, he calls it a joint venture between the Aam Aadmi Party and the BJP at the centre.
Jyoti, I would hope, and I speak more as an idealist with a fair degree of hope. I don't know where Mr. Bajwa's basis for this is, but I would hope that the centre and state would come together on this and not look at it as something of short-term political gain. For the centre to pin the blame on the state, that law and order is a state subject, and for the state to say, well, we don't have the resources to do so and we're already stretched. I would hope that this is not ping pong and this is not short-term political gain, but rather a position where they should have come together. But to begin with,
hope.
But that's hope. But the primary responsibility for law and order rests with the state. At the same point of time, to sort of contextualize, a Congress spokesperson, due to his remarks, can be deboarded from an aircraft where he's boarded to be placed under arrest.
Pawan Khera.
At virtually
very
very, very short notice. No notice was served on him to begin with. And we could act decisively. And here is somebody who made threats against the Home Minister of India, who has spoken of a secessionist movement, has the capability of creating a serious law and order issue. And here we are waiting, not taking action. And now to say that there was potential, as in the potential was all over the place. The fact that all the news stories that are coming out about what all Amritpal could have become and how his de-addiction centers weren't, I believe ThePrint did a fantastic story about the status of affairs.
So why do you think that the centre has been waiting for so long after the threats against the Home Minister, talk of secessionism? Why do you think the centre is waiting, the Home Minister, Amit Shah? Why is the BJP waiting?
I honestly have no reason to know. I have no explanation for that. I have no idea why either of them were waiting. This was something that needed to have been nipped in the bud quickly. And I honestly have no idea as to why they would let this fester.
Why? What are people in Punjab saying? You live in Punjab. Your parents live in Punjab. What are they saying?
Well, the ground position on Amritpal, as I've said, has been one of, I would put it rather as two buckets. Bucket number one, very small following, we're going to ignore him, we have far bigger issues to deal with, and genuinely far bigger issues, from lack of employment opportunities to a lack of a cogent industry to a massive drug problem to issues that the Sikh faith is having with the rise of deras and propagation of Christianity, so on and so forth. So there's that lot. And the second lot who is, so one lot who ignores him in the face of larger issues in the state, and the second large majority is to see him as an upstart, as somebody who's come out of nowhere, who's misaligned and misguided. And the third portion of Amritpal's support base is a very small support base. By his own admission, in one of his interviews, he said we managed to have 1,000 people do Amrit Sanchar, and we've managed to have them sort of leave the way.
And yet, Mr. Panag, and yet he's captured the imagination of the state, and yet he continues to run.
Captured the imagination of the state by virtue of his actions at Ajnala, his digital presence, and also by his cowardice. I think we are missing out the point that there is a significant portion of those in Punjab who just find him to be a charlatan, see him as a small-time thug. Yet the fact that he's running speaks more about his lack of ideological commitment, and the fact that the suspicious circumstances that led to his rise sort of demonstrate that he was no hardliner. He was nobody who actually had the capability to go any further.
But it also speaks of the fact that the state is unable to capture him, to catch him.
If I could not agree more with you there.
But is that incapacity or is it unwillingness?
Well, I would add another element to it at the cost of sort of, without trying to generalize the Punjab police, it also speaks of incompetence, of the fact that with this they let this happen. And they let this happen after such an important event happened in February at Ajnala. There is no question why he should be on the run for this long.
So now you wear a turban. The Sikhs in Punjab, the memories that I'm sure a lot of people still have of what happened in the 80s of Bhindranwale. Do you think that the possibility of Amritpal Singh becoming again this larger than life kind of figure, do you think that exists, or people are or are they just fed up?
I think, as I said previously, Punjab closed a chapter in its bloody history. That said, Punjab is undergoing a very unique political and social, is in a very unique political and social position
today
because of a bruised psyche on multiple counts, from our economy to the drug problem to lack of employment, and the fact that, let me put it in the converse, Jyoti. I've never been called a Khalistani until the farmers' movement started. Mm-hmm. And then if anybody disagrees, today if I disagree with the policy of the government, I get labeled a Khalistani, which didn't happen.
So who's calling you a Khalistan?
Well, there are several individuals on social media who'll go out there and say this to anything that where one disagrees with the government, and one gets called a Khalistani. Supporters of the farmers' protest, well, the right to protest is everybody's. The right to disagree with those protesting is also everybody's.
Right.
And to have the kind of statements that were made that this is an anti-national protest, this is infiltrated. Well, there was. One cannot deny that there were elements who were trying to hijack the protest, but largely there were farmers from several northern states who were out there to raise their grievances, and protest is a fundamental right in a democracy. So there is an element where all of a sudden there has been an attempt to sort of other Sikhs mm-hmm. as part of political discourse, and that has its impact. There are concerns about the manner in which minorities are being treated, and and statements that are being made statements being made about a Hindu Rashtra, which again have a bearing.
So the Sikhs are noticing that.
So everybody's noticing that. Why I believe any minority community would notice that this is happening. And to top it all, one element is to say, okay, fine, somebody's political thought is to say Hindu Rashtra, absolutely fair. They have their right to say it, absolutely. Just like I have my right to disagree with it and believe that the idea of the India that that my idea of India is very different from that, and that's absolutely fair. But when you have that, and there is a weaponizing that happens over and above in terms of targeting folks, calling and name calling, our discourse across the board has fallen to the pits.
Right.
And over and above this, to every piece of dissent to have an anti-national tag, and this new, whether we become Tukde gang, or the other day it's to move people from one geographically remote part of India to Pakistan. All of this creates social and political tensions. And Punjab is also seen a leaderless moment in terms of yes, the Aam Aadmi parties come with a heavy mandate, but the previous political leadership of the state, whether it be the Akalis or the Congress, have all been significantly discredited. The Aam Aadmi party is a first-time government in Punjab. Most of them are the first-time most of them are for the first time. They're not just running a government, but also engaging with government with government in such a comprehensive manner. So there is all of these elements that were coming together, which were creating circumstances, strife, dissent, which which Amritpal was capitalizing on.
So the Aam Aadmi Party unable or unwilling, would you say unwilling?
I would say at this juncture, I think it's too soon to say whether they were unwilling or they didn't know or unable. But I would definitely say poor judgment calls at this juncture. I'd revise my view in a few months when one's able to see how this has played out, and I would not call a spade then. But I think at this juncture it is poor calculation, poor planning,
and of a
law and order situation, a political vacuum, and not acting soon enough.
So in this cocktail that you just described, the idea of Khalistan, the idea of a separate state, of a secessionist movement, does that capture the imagination of people?
It doesn't. Not in India. Our diaspora is an altogether different issue. Our diaspora, who have sort of most of whom have very little factual knowledge of what about the events in Punjab. It's myth that over a period of few generations they've converted to fact. A deep sense of persecution, a significant number of them getting their citizenship in multiple countries on the basis of creating a sort of claiming that it's an ecosystem which sort of promotes the fact that the affairs in Punjab are so bad that they can't they couldn't be here because it helps citizenship, it helps grants, it helps so on and so forth in these countries. So I would say the diaspora, if they are so keen for a Khalistan, they should sort of start a political movement in Canada on a lighter note, because there are no takers in Punjab.
There are no takers in Punjab at all for the idea of Khalistan or for the idea of seceding from India.
Those who are takers are such a minuscule minority that they wouldn't even be able to win a panchayat election, let alone an MLA seat.
And yet, Amritpal Singh, who talks about the idea of Khalistan or of seceding from India, has, if you like,
limited following.
Limited following. Okay, let me ask you about the diaspora. You talked about how the diaspora has little clue about what's happening back home. Having said that, in London, you've had huge protests outside the Indian High Commission. The Indian government has summoned, the Ministry of External Affairs has summoned the Canadian envoy here in Delhi because of protests in Canada. In the US, you've had Khalistani supporters. What's going on in the diaspora? Are they living in another world?
Absolutely, they're living it completely. They're on an entirely different planet, and it's firstly all the attacks on our embassies and high commissions and consulates are deeply must be condemned. We have and it's most of those in the diaspora won't be able to hold a straight conversation about Punjab, about the affairs of Punjab, the statistics that a lot of them peddle about the excesses that happen in Punjab. I've read statistics where they have claimed more people have died than the entire population of Punjab that's as it stands today. So that is the level of misinformation here. There is an ecosystem of gaining citizenship and gaining grants, due to which they need to continuously peddle the political asylum and the asylum seeking narrative, but the on-ground situation is very, very different.
But are you saying that the Sikh diaspora, which is or this pro-Khalistani sentiment that we see abroad amongst the Sikh community, obviously it's not that every Sikh living abroad believes in this sort of the so-called Khalistani state, but having said that, in Canada, for example, political parties that are weighing into the Punjab situation,
because there is. Without again generalizing, it pays to claim that you've been persecuted, and that's become a political identity, and that political identity has yielded dividends politically, socially, economically for some in the diaspora, and they work very hard to keep it alive.
So you would say that the Jagmeet Singhs of the world, I'm talking about the Canadian politician, he has no clue about what's happening back home in Punjab.
He's evidently ill-informed about the ground situation in Punjab. He will not be, and I'll go on the record to say it, he'd not be able to hold a fact-based discussion or debate on Punjab, and he's not evidently keen to have a constructive solution to the problems, which ideally he shouldn't, but even in terms of communicating a solution to those to his constituents. But by doing what he does, typically in the genre of rabble rousing, he's preaching to his already established choir.
So this Sikh community, which believes in this so-called pro-Khalistan sentiment, is it because they haven't done, I mean, they're financially quite wealthy people. So what is this idea that Punjab must secede from India? I mean, where does it come from?
Well, it's some are wealthy, some are not, some are sort of doing blue-collar jobs, some are misinformed, some are genuine victims of political mileage that others are trying to gain. But bottom line being, there was an intellectual and ideological debate about having a separate Sikh nation. It emanates all the way back to Ranjit Singh's time. Starting the early 1900s, I think, when the idea and identity of being Indian came into being, some fought that identity, that we must have a distinct Sikh identity from being Indian. And then there were lots who equally fought the idea that the identity of us being Indian stands out. Like, if you ask me what my identity is first being Indian, and my identity is second being Sikh. It's in that order. It never goes. It never, you know.
And there's no contradiction in terms.
There is none. There's no contradiction whatsoever in these terms. So there was an ideological conversation. That ideological conversation, to the key constituents of that ideological conversation, is no longer one, which is Punjab. And there is a diaspora outside Punjab that wishes to live in La La land about it, and they're most welcome to seek such. They're most welcome to seek such political objectives outside India.
So, last couple of questions, Sherbir. The Pakistan question. Punjab is a border state. We've seen during the 1980s when there was a clear sort of infiltration, both of drugs, money, terrorism,
drugs,
weapons.
Even now.
Drugs even now, but at the time you had weaponry, for example. Now, would you say today that it is Pakistan that is sort of fishing in the troubled waters that you described earlier?
Absolutely, Jyoti. Pakistan, even at its worst, with its current economic situation being in absolute shambles, they will still, at an opportunity, decide to go by their age-old adage of 1,000 cuts to bleed India. And we are creating political circumstances and social circumstances for them to take advantage of. I have no doubt that Amritpal has direct or indirect backing of the ISI. There is absolutely no doubt. As you started by saying, his time in Dubai, and then his, and then him coming back, and the suspicious circumstances around which he has risen to his relatively low level of prominence would not have been possible if he was not being propped up. And why would Pakistan lose an opportunity to create strife? And it would hardly cost anything to cause this kind of strife.
Yeah, but absolutely. But you and me are still talking about this. It's been a few weeks since the Ajnala incident. He is running. Amritpal Singh is running. He hasn't been able to be. He's not been caught or arrested or investigated. And so I think the fact that these troubled waters doesn't bode well for Punjab.
It doesn't. Not at all. We are in very dangerous territory. And Amritpal needs to be caught, and caught swiftly. And over and above not just him being caught, we need a model prosecution for the offences that were committed at Ajnala. A public and a model prosecution. Any extrajudicial, extra-legal actions will only add to this small-time charlatans myth. And that's something that Punjab and both the centre and the state must avoid at any cost.
And perhaps all political parties must come together and
Absolutely.
speak up with one voice, whether it's the Congress or the Shiromani Akali Dal or the BJP.
As they did.
And the
as they did in the 80s. In fact, if you look at the ideological position of most parties at that time of promoting peace and harmony between the communities by establishing that both Hindus and Sikhs and Muslims, predominantly Hindus and Sikhs, were facing an extremist threat, and that this wasn't one community fighting another community, I think all those ideological positions need to be reiterated now more than ever.
Sherbir Panag, on this note, thank you so much for speaking to ThePrint and for explaining this complicated story and yet simple one, but It has so many dimensions, but thank you so much
Thank you.
for your
Thank
time.
you so much.